From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, I am Estefanía Bravo, and this is From the South. Members of Sri Lanka's Christian minority are afraid to go to church after the deadly attacks that hit Easter services on Sunday. A bishop has said that the church is the country and is still in shock over Sunday's attacks that have left at least 290 people killed. Now the community is worried that the events can also prompt more widespread communal violence. The government said it believed the National Tawhid Jamaat was behind the attacks.
Actually, we never expected such a thing to happen in Sri Lanka and in Catholic churches, because we have been living in a very tranquil and very peaceful atmosphere in Sri Lanka after 30 years of war, and we thought that there won't be any more bomb blast and situations like this. And it was really a very big shock, and we are dumbfounded.
And the country's industry is expected to take a knock as thousands of tourists have started leaving the country. Holidaymakers are flocking to the main airport, cutting short their vacations after the worst violence since the end of a civil war a decade ago.
It's sad, it happens all over the world. It happened in New Zealand where we used to live. It happened when we were in Amsterdam, it happened there as well. I'm from Manchester and it happened there last year as well, so it's happening everywhere, yeah.
Two of the victims of a bar shooting in Mexico that left 13 people dead have been laid to rest. The victims, Cesar Hernandez and his one-year-old son, were buried by their friends and family. President Andrés Manuel López Obrador visited the city of Minatitlán in the state of Veracruz, where the shooting took place. He promised his government will guarantee the safety of Mexicans.
I deeply regret what happened in Minatitlán, what has also been happening in other areas. I just want to say that we are going to guarantee peace in Veracruz. That is my commitment as President of the Republic.
Official figures show that during the first 3 months of 2019, murders have increased in almost 10%. Around 9,000 people were murdered between January and March this year. López Obrador campaigned on the promise to fight violence in his country. The first televised debate between Spain's four main political parties is underway ahead of the April 28th general elections. The candidates, which includes Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez, face each other on a Monday night. Several media houses and organizations are following the debate with live fact-checking. Although not part of the debate, newly established far-right political party Vox is gaining momentum, making it the first time a far right-wing party could enter the national parliament in Spain's history. Catalan independence, abortion, and taxes are three of the main topics present in the Spanish general election campaigns. However, recent surveys suggest that the Spanish people are more concerned about the unemployment rate and corruption.
60% of Spanish people think that the unemployment rate and the lack of opportunities are the country's main problems. But what measures are the parties proposing in order to improve the situation? The right-wing Popular Party speaks about reducing corporate and income taxes, while the similarly aligned Citizens Party advocate the creation of a so-called universal contract.
We propose to end the so-called garbage contracts and to create a permanent single contract for everyone. So from the first day, people can start their jobs with the same opportunities. That way, if you are young, you don't have to face an invisible wall that blocks you from progressing and having a permanent contract, something that we're seeing right now in Spain.
For its part, the left wing has criticized the universal contract, saying it leaves workers even more unprotected. The Socialist Party proposes to reform the labor law, while the Together We Can Party talks about improving workers' negotiating position.
We have a labor market that generates precarious work and wage stagnation as a consequence of a disconnection between salaries and productivity. We need to reinforce the collective power to negotiate, which is currently broken, so that when productivity increases at a company, salaries can also rise.
One of the main policies introduced by the previous administration was the increase of the basic salary to 900 euros. The measure was branded by the right wing as an attack on job creation. However, the left wing defends the decision, and the Unidas Podemos party even proposes to increase the minimum wage to 1,200 euros.
Despite the deceit of increasing the basic salary for just 3% of workers, taxes have risen for the immense majority. That's meant that job creation in the last 3 months is less than half of what it was in the same 3 months last year. What's more, over 50,000 people have become unemployed.
The rise of basic salary has meant a 7% increase for social security funding.
There are 9.7 million pensioners in Spain, so the sustainability of pensions is one of the country's 5 main problems. The left wing congratulated itself for the rise in the pension budget, while the right-wing Popular Party defended itself from those who say they're trying to change the system from public to private.
Even when we were on the edge of the economic crisis, we kept the pensions and even increased the budget. But now we have to make some reforms so that current pensions, just like those in 2050 and 2060, are guaranteed.
It looks like we are prophets of doom. It looks like the pensions are a risk. They are not. And actually, the Socialist Party is committed to revaluing the pensions related to the Consumer Price Index.
The electoral campaign has failed to focus on the second most important concern of the Spanish people, corruption and fraud. Instead, the debate focuses on the Catalan situation, which less than 11% of people are worried about.
Russia's deputy defense minister has accused the U.S. government of being behind the power outages that hit Venezuela recently and of ongoing attacks. He also said that the Bolivarian armed forces are ready to deflect any attacks on their nation.
The situation in Venezuela continues to be very challenging. You are aware of recent developments, and again it is the US that is to blame. It came up with a list of enemies. Today it is Venezuela, and then it's Cuba and Nicaragua. They have ignored or rather trampled on international law and rules of decency. Again, the situation on the ground is very challenging. The military option is still on the table for the US, and that's been their tool of intimidation. However, the US is unlikely to benefit from the use of force. The odds are that an external attack might rally the nation behind the current government, painting a negative image of the US. Furthermore, it could ruffle the feathers of regional powers in Latin America. Anyway, the US does not sit idly and is employing other tactics, including a broad range of techniques developed for hybrid wars and color revolutions. The Americans have been training leaders and members of extremist groups. They have been ramping up pressure, including bribery, bullying, and sectoral sanctions. Operation Blackout is underway. It is a man-made shutdown of energy facilities, which is having an adverse impact on the situation, deepening the economic crisis. Our opinion is that the legitimate government of Nicolas Maduro keeps the situation under control, and the military stand ready to repel an outside attack. Russia is providing assistance, primarily under our existing defense contracts. Our specialists are helping Venezuela repair some military equipment.
The website VenezuelaAnalysis.com has just been restored after massive distributed denial of service attacks overwhelmed the server where the page is currently hosted. The attacks began last week and then significantly escalated on the weekend. Venezuela Analysis provides independent, grassroots-based reporting on Venezuela that counters the narratives found in the English-speaking corporate media. Joining us now from Caracas is Ricardo Vaz, a journalist with VenezuelaAnalysis.com. Good to have you with us, Ricardo.
Hi, thanks for having me.
What's the latest on the website, and do you have any leads regarding who might have tried to take down the page and from what location?
Well, as you've said, the webpage has been restored just a couple of hours ago. It had been offline since Saturday morning after this massive distributed denial of service attacks. but we have no clue about the assailants or their location. I mean, by design, these attacks are very difficult to track, and all that we've tried to do was basically add another layer of protection to the website that will hopefully prevent this kind of attacks from happening again in the future.
Yeah, Ricardo, it's probably no surprise that Venezuela Analysis was always a potential target. Any thoughts as to why this happened now?
Well, I mean, Venezuela Analysis is an independent website reporting in English from the ground in Venezuela. I mean, we're not the only website reporting in English on Venezuela, but we're the only ones on the ground exclusively dedicated to that. And moreover, we are determined to counter the kind of monolithic narrative that you find in the mainstream media, which is very much on board the regime change efforts that are going on. So in that sense, it's no secret. I mean, we have received threats on social media, and there was even an episode where Gustavo Tarre, who was appointed by self-proclaimed interim president as quote-unquote ambassador to the Organization of American States, he sent us a letter asking us to stop referring to Juan Guaido as self-proclaimed. So, I mean, this doesn't have anything to do probably with the attack, but it is to say that there are definitely people who are not happy with the coverage that we provide, but I mean, we should be prepared for it, not just us. I mean, any website or a news service like Telesur, which counters the mainstream narrative, is bound to prove a huge nuisance for the powers that be, let's say.
Yeah. Ricardo, what about the role of the media in covering, for example, the sanctions and the events in Venezuela? For anyone who's watching this and who hasn't followed Venezuela Analysis, perhaps can you tell us a bit about how the coverage differs from the other mainstream media?
Yeah, so on the role of the media, I mean, it's very clear that within this ongoing aggression against Venezuela, the media is very much one of the battlegrounds. And you've seen, whenever tensions escalate, this usually comes in lockstep with an increased aggression from the media. The coverage goes up to a higher tone in an attempt to perhaps justify, for example, in the 2007 violent opposition protests, it looked to provide a cover for the opposition. Now it meant to push the idea of the humanitarian crisis, perhaps even providing kind of a moral cover for a foreign intervention. So this is no surprise. And what Venezuela Analysis has tried to do is to present the side of the story that's never heard of, and that's the Venezuelan grassroots. And simply by doing that, we undermine the narrative that's being pushed by the mainstream media. I mean, sanctions, as you brought up, is a very good example. Just the other day, we saw a story on the Washington Post about Juan Guaido and the current political crisis. And it mentioned sanctions as a tool to remove Nicolas Maduro from power. And then much later on in the story, it mentioned the economic crisis, electricity blackouts, the plummeting oil production, food and medicine shortages, and so on, as if they are completely disconnected from sanctions. So this is just one example of something that's clearly misrepresented, when in fact sanctions have played a key role in all of those things that I listed. Even the recent electricity crisis. This isn't to say that it's exclusively caused by US sanctions, but sanctions are definitely an important factor to take into account.
Ricardo, we thank you so much for your time for Telesur English.
Thanks for having me.
We have been speaking with Ricardo Vaz. He's a journalist from VenezuelaAnalysis.com on the recent attacks to their website. Let's take a short break now. Join us in a few. Welcome back. Colombia's President Iván Duque has visited the southwest of the country, where at least 17 people died on Sunday in a mudslide. Duque has ordered for aid to be delivered to the area of the disaster. Other 13 people remain missing after the disaster buried 8 houses in Rosas in the department of Cauca. 5 people were injured.
This has been a hard, difficult situation that hurts us. But Colombia is resilient, and in the midst of pain, we are united to respond.
And the search for people trapped under rubble continues, while locals are helping rescue teams in their work. So far, 16 out of the 17 bodies rescued have been identified. The victims are 10 women and 7 men, including 4 children. 6 teenagers have died in Ecuador and 3 were seriously injured when their car collided with a truck. The 4 boys and 2 girls, who are between the ages of 14 and 18, were part of the Pichincha Mountaineering and Rock Climbing Association. They were heading back to Quito after spending the Eastern holiday climbing in the Chimborazo mountain. The injured were transferred to a nearby hospital. Moving on, at least 25 people have died when a passenger bus crashed in Bolivia and plunged into a ravine. President Evo Morales offered condolences to the victims' families on social media. The bus is said to have skidded on the wet road and collided with 2 cars before plummeting roughly 300 meters. At least a dozen people have been injured. The president of Bolivia, Evo Morales, is on an official visit to Argentina. Morales met with his counterpart Mauricio Macri to discuss trade, cooperation, and other topics. Our correspondent in Argentina, Edgardo Esteban, explains.
Bolivian President Evo Morales is in an official visit to Argentina. He arrived on Sunday, attending an event with thousands of Bolivian citizens outside Buenos Aires. On Monday, Morales has met with his Argentinian counterpart, Mauricio Macri. They discussed about humanitarian aid and health agreements, also focusing on the taxes the Argentinian government imposed on some Bolivian migrants to access health care. They also talked about accords related to natural gas, which include a budget of $460 million over the next 4 years. They also discussed about the construction of military planes that Argentina can sell to Bolivia. Finally, they touched upon energy agreements and about the political situation in Venezuela, as the Bolivian president has repeatedly showed his support for the Venezuelan president, Nicolás Maduro, and his government.
We thank Edgardo Esteban for that report. Argentinian officials have defended new price control measures proposed by the government. The measures aim to stop the rise of inflation and the living cost. The Argentinian economy is in a critical situation as the country is battling a recession. Some economists criticize the proposal, saying the measures went against the government's free market policies. Peru's public prosecutor investigating the Odebrecht corruption scandal has hit back at criticisms of his use of pretrial detention for suspects in the case. In a TV interview on Sunday evening, President Martín Vizcarra had suggested that what should be an exceptional measure was being applied on a routine basis. In reply, the prosecutor José Domingo Pérez demanded respect for the independent administration of justice. And Costa Rica has celebrated 150 years of free public education in the country. Vice President Marvin Rodriguez attended an event in a public school to commemorate the date. The 6th president of Costa Rica, Jesus Jiménez Zamora, introduced the resolution in 1869, in which primary education was set to be mandatory for both genders, as well as free and funded by the state. On Saturday, the play Paraidolia made its debut at the Caracas International Film Festival in Venezuela. The show is produced by a Chilean company and uses everyday inanimate objects to play on the audience's imagination.
As props and other objects show up on stage, a whimsical universe captivates the audience. Actors use personification to cause viewers to see entities within objects that actually do not exist.
This play is related to pareidolia, which is the scientific explanation for why our brains interpret our back stimulates as something we know. Pareidolia is essentially that interpretation. So, in this case, the play calls on viewers to tap into the imaginations of their inner child.
The play by the Chilean theater company, the Master Team, does not include words, but drama, comedy, and creativity supplemented.
We demonstrate that incredible things can be seen in everyday items that everyone has at hand. We can do extraordinary things with ordinary objects.
People from all ages and backgrounds can enjoy and be amazed by the play.
The overall message we hope to send is that everyone has imagination, not just children. As we grow older, we believe that playing with simple things such as pieces of plastic, paper, or cardboard is reserved for children. But the reality is that we can use these same things to make theater.
Pareidolia was born in 2017 after extensive research surrounding the theater of objects. They found that they could use objects, illusion, and visual poetry to make theater.
Animal activists have demonstrated outside an annual rodeo event in Uruguay after 2 horses died during the competition. Protesters held banners that read "Torture Week" and "Don't Justify Torture" by calling it culture and demanding the event be banned. The jineteada is a tradition in Uruguay's Huacho culture where riders must stay on a horse for a specific amount of time.
The jineteadas are explicit manifestations of violence, and this week 2 horses died. These are deaths that are preventable.
People who want to ban jineteadas are a minority, but we have done assessments with veterinarians about the sport, and we do take good care of the horses.
We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Welcome back. Footage showing Israeli soldiers shooting at a Palestinian teen has been released, causing controversy. The video shows 15-year-old Osama Hareha being shot at least once while he was handcuffed and blindfolded. The teenager got injured in his groin. He was transferred to a hospital in Bethlehem in the West Bank. Soldiers prevented people from helping the teen. At least 5 people died in a magnitude 6.3 earthquake that struck the Philippines in the island of Luzon. Terrified locals ran into the streets of the capital, Manila, as the quake sent skyscrapers swaying. The local media reported some structures had collapsed and the Clark International Airport, a former U.S. military base, suffered some damage and had closed. U.S. State Secretary Mike Pompeo has confirmed that the U.S. will enforce sanctions to countries that import oil from Iran. He also said there will be no grace period for those countries to comply. In November, the U.S. sanctioned exports of Iranian oil after President Donald Trump unilaterally pulled out of the 2015 nuclear deal.
Today, I'm announcing that we will no longer grant any exemptions. We're going to zero across the board. We will continue to enforce sanctions and monitor compliance. Any nation or entity interacting with Iran should do its diligence and err on the side of caution. The risks are simply not going to be worth the benefits.
Former Finance Minister of Mali, Boubou Cisse, has been appointed as Prime Minister days after the government resigned. The former Prime Minister quit following fierce criticism for failing to disarm militias and stoking violence that led a massacre in which 160 Fulani herders were killed. On Sunday, unidentified gunmen raided an army base at dawn, killing at least 11 soldiers. Cholera and malaria continue to spread in Mozambique after Cyclone Idai. More than 5,000 cholera cases and over 10,000 malaria cases have so far been recorded. Charity organizations are on the ground helping affected people and fighting further outbreaks.
We've deployed many international aid workers to support the response here as it continues, the needs continue and evolve. We've deployed a field hospital to respond to some of the recent health risks, including cholera.
And with that story, we've come to the end of this news brief. These and other stories, as always, find them on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also join us on social media. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. Thank you for watching.